I think that, yeah. Ed, could we turn it so there's very little of my voice in the house speakers, please? I appreciate that. I don't think you all need it as much, right? Because we're fairly close. And I can speak loud enough and so forth and so on. But I do want to check in. I don't know how many of you ever watch any of this online, but I noticed... I'm going to forget. When I do like 6 of these in a row, or I plan 6 of them out, I lose track of which one I'm in. I think it was last week's Bible study, but it might have been 2 weeks ago, that was very muffled. And what I noticed was that if the microphone starts wandering up here, it just doesn't pick up well. So I might ask those of you that are here, if you see that I'm starting to be a upwards pointing microphone, wave at me or something, or like do something like that. I don't know, whatever you could think of, I would appreciate that, because I want to serve everyone, not only you, but those who are trying by phone. And I noticed also that today I neglected to turn on the phone for those who wanted to tune into the service. And that's 13, 14 people. So just feel bad about that. So many moving parts. And we'll hopefully get it working right. Well, we're running a little bit late, but it's a holiday weekend, so maybe we're okay with it, being the way it is. Anybody? I hope you're not planning on heading to Lake Travis. They had a bunch of boats sink, right? Just too many people out there with too many boats. I never saw waves that big on Lake Travis, except a lot of people crisscrossing and doing wild things. So stay safe in that regard. How about anybody got any plans for Labor Day? No? Gonna hang out and be home and be safe. Make yourself, anybody going to do burgers on the grill, hot dogs? We're going to do some traditional stuff? Vegetables on the grill. I like grilled asparagus. That's good. You ever grilled pineapple? That is tasty too. That's very, very good. So we definitely want to enjoy some of those things. Well, I want to encourage you. I'm not going to be able to name out page numbers. I'm sorry, I don't have the Story Bible with me. I'm going to go from my own Bible here. But we want to take a look at the story of Esther, at these main characters of Mordecai, and of course Esther, and even a little bit at the evil Haman. And I was joking, yeah, stomp your feet. For those of you that didn't get to hear the service because of my error, a Jewish tradition is that on the festival of Purim, which is coming up in 2021 in February 25th and 26th, if I have my dates right, that they read the entire book of Esther while they're there in their synagogue service. And every time they mention the name of the evil foe, the children do these noise clackers or noise makers, and everyone also, the adults, and stomp their feet whenever they say the name of Haman. So we'll make some noise too. It's fascinating. Another little bit of history. If you think about it, the Jews have a lot of reasons to celebrate this holiday. And maybe even more so here in modern times, because they were facing a genocide. God worked out the circumstances to spare them of that, and they were able to continue on as a nation. We know in the 1930s and 40s, they faced another genocide. God eventually brought deliverance for that as well, but there was great suffering and great loss. And so the Jewish people, this festival means a lot to them. It's probably their happiest, most joyful festival. It was interesting to read that even in the 4th century AD, that there were special laws and rules and proclamations by the Roman emperor that the Jews were celebrating a little too much. That they were encouraged to fill their glasses all the way up to the rim and then fill them again as a part of the celebration. And a part of what they also would do was they would either burn or hang Haman's effigy. There we go. We heard his name, so we've got to make our noise. And they often chose to do so in the means in which people were executed at that time, which was crucifixion. And the emperor was worried that if they're doing these things, like the evil guy from Esther, and remember he gets impaled on a pole in the story, that if they're putting him on a crucifix, then it just reminds you all a little too much of Christianity, and let's just settle this whole thing down. So between the drunkenness and it looking like not an appropriate way of honoring the crucifixion, there were these rules and regulations about trying to tamp it down. But that's how much they were celebrating and wanting to have a great time with this. So we want to dig in a little bit here to Esther ourselves. And as we do so, I want to just notice, first of all, Mordecai. We'll focus on him, but let's start off with a prayer right now. Gracious Lord and our God in heaven, we know that you look down. We know that you see us. We know that you care about even the smallest detail of our lives. And we ask you to help us in response to your love and your mindfulness. You would help us be aware of our moments, of our words, of your word, and all that you would say to us and all that you would teach us. We pray this in faith in the name of Jesus. Amen. So let's look at Mordecai for a minute. Let's notice some of the things at work in Mordecai. And for that, I want to get us to Esther chapter 2. Now, the whole first chapter of Esther is the story of Queen Vashti, this incredible feast and banquet that the king Xerxes puts on. It's interesting to note that they point out that there in chapter 1 that this was in the third year of his reign, right? I think it says that in verse 3, Esther 1, verse 3, in the third year of his reign. He gave this incredible banquet. What they don't tell you, but the history books tell us, was that in the third year of his reign, this is when he set out and went to go conquer over towards Egypt and other parts that were not yet part of the Babylonian Empire. So in essence, he's throwing a great big party. All right, guys, come drink my wine and eat my food, and let's all enjoy that moment together because we're about to go off to war, and we don't know when or if we're coming back. So it's a big party moment in that aspect. And Queen Vashti, is not interested in being just a prize to look at when they're all drunk and full of wine and everything else, so she doesn't come. She gets deposed. And now they've searched for a new queen, and Esther has been made that queen. As I mentioned in the sermon, what an interesting thing that you have a queen unwilling to follow the king's commands, and then a search to find a new queen, and they recruit thousands of women from all over this kingdom. And somehow, some way, out of all that, it winnows down sort of like I guess one of these bachelor or bachelorette shows, right? She's the one who gets the rose, and she gets invited back and becomes the queen. And Esther is there. Now, we read something about how Esther was raised, and this is in chapter 2. Let's start at verse 5. In the citadel of Susa, a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken with Jehoiachin, the last king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he then brought up because her father and mother had died in all of the siege, all of the war. They had not lived. And so as he became a refugee and she became a refugee, he took her in as her closest male family member. So there's a kindness, there's a compassion already that we see in Mordecai, and aware of that. I think it's also worth noting that they said this happens in Susa. Susa was the winter capital for the emperor. Normally he's in Babylon, but in the wintertime he would go to Susa. The weather was better there and so forth. And it was supposed to be as extravagant, if not more so, than Babylon with its hanging gardens and everything else. There's some quite remarkable archaeological work that has been done in the ruins of Susa, finding the city walls, and really quite an empire. You can explore online and see all of that kind of stuff. So they're not in the main capital. This reminds me of how FDR used to go down to Georgia, to the hot springs area, and they called that the Little White House. He would go there in the wintertime to, have better weather and to get the treatments from the hot springs and so on. So you have that kind of concept. And Mordecai sees his cousin being taken in, and yet in verse 10, when she's taken in, he points out she had not revealed her nationality and her family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. We don't know exactly why. The Jews are sort of living intermixed with everyone else, but based on how the rest of the story goes here very soon, you can see that there was at least some already animosity towards the Jews at this time, and so it was just a sense of practicality and being protective of her, that he's like, don't tell anyone right now what your background is. I'm just a refugee. Is all the story you need to tell at this point. And so she goes and becomes even more beautiful as she gets all these beauty treatments and being taken care of by eunuchs and all these other folks. And so we see that, again, that caring, that protectiveness of Mordecai. But we see even more than that. If we get to the end of chapter 2, and I think I even have this in the slides to show you now here. Let's try. See if we can't make this work. We were, bless her heart, JJ did her very best back there, but our computer was just giving her problems, and even I'm having problems getting this to load up. So I just want to read it to you, and if I see that it pops up here, I'll start to advance it. But we're at the end of Esther chapter 2. Specifically, we're around verse 20. And we're reminded here at Esther 2, verse 20, that she had kept her family background and nationality a secret because Mordecai had told her to do so. Even as she is the queen, she continues to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. You can almost kind of picture, hey, I don't have my mom and dad around, but I have the wisest man I've possibly known. He's never steered me wrong before. I'm going to listen to what he says. And so she is doing that and following along in that way, caring for, he is caring for her still. And while, here, what else? He's not just caring for that, but he's a very good citizen as well. During the time, we've got verse 21 now up there on the screen. During the time that Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, all these, just say the names fast when you're in the Old Testament, right? Just say them fast. Don't get hung up on it. At the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's gatekeepers are there, and they're his officers who guarded the doorway. They became angry. They conspired to assassinate Xerxes. So there's a plot afoot. There's someone who wants to assassinate the king. Mordecai found out about the plot, and he told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving Mordecai the credit. And I think that's an important thing to notice. Hey, king, this guy, Mordecai, heard about this plot to kill you. And so that they was very careful to point out that after they investigated and they find out that it's true the two officials are impaled on poles. That's the way you put somebody to death. It was the earlier version of crucifixion. Impaled them on poles. And this whole incident was recorded in this the journal, or the annal, of the book of the Kings, and in the presence of the king. So it gets written down, the king hears about it, but it's sort of in one ear and out the other, and he forgets. That detail is going to come back up later. So it's a useful thing, I think, to notice. He's being a good citizen. He is looking out for his king, even though he's in a foreign country. He doesn't, isn't really his king by choice or by compulsion, but he's being a good citizen and seeking to save his life. And the acts that we do, whether we get credit for them or not, the righteous acts that we do are still right to do, right? They're right in the aspect of it's the right thing to do. Anybody that had heard that should have reported it. And he did that, but it's also showing our own righteousness or our own relationship with God, that we're living out and doing the right things. So what drives him? What is it's behind this? There's this, again, compassion and caring. There's also wisdom there, not to tell that, but also I'm going to be a good citizen. I'm going to do the right thing. Well, what about our villain? What about Haman? What's driving this guy, right? And we see a very different kind of mindset, a very different motivation that's behind Haman. And I think this is worth, oh yes, thank you. I don't know how to make the noise so that it comes through the mic, so I'll do that, because when you're on a stool, stomping on your feet, it's just disruptive, so don't mind me. Haman is just a hot mess. And it's interesting that Xerxes chooses to honor this guy. And notice it points out he is the Agagite. You see that his name? There's another one I'm saying. What that means, what especially the Jewish people's traditional belief is, he is a descendant of Agag, a king who had tried also to annihilate and fight against the Jewish people back in the time of King Saul. This is the king that Saul had been told, wipe him out, all of his fighting men, everything, his animals, don't let a single thing live. And Saul disobeys that command from God, and the prophet Samuel actually has to be the one that puts him to death. That's King Agag. And so the thought is, for this name, is that he was a descendant of that king, and he too was a warrior against and fighting against and had problems with the Jewish people. So you see in him really this sense of selfishness, and that he's trying to do all this, that it's not enough for him to be an honored person there in the king's presence. But he wants even more, right? He wants to be honored by all. He wants people bowing down to him and all of this. We'll see if we can get our thing working here again and advance those slides and show that. He gets a seat of honor all above all the other royal officials, and so much so that even other people have to bow down to him. You would think that such a thing would be enough to make a guy be happy, but no, he has to have 100% of the people bow down to him. It's not enough that just, okay, I win the opinion polls, 85% of people wouldn't, like Putin's numbers of approval in a totalitarian state. Those aren't good enough. I want even more. And so he wants all the royal officials to bow down to him, and everybody does, except our second hero in the story. Main one's Esther, but our second hero, Mordecai, right? He will not bow down. He will not do that. And this is recorded in chapter 3, sorry. He gets paid this honor, and then in verse 3, the officials ask Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? And they keep trying to get him to honor Haman, but he won't do it. And Haman, instead of noticing everybody else cheering him, instead of noticing how 99% of the people think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, Mordecai's focus is on the one negative one. I want to suggest to you that I interpret that, and I'm aware of this myself. That's a lack of maturity. When if you're secure enough, I'm a rich, wealthy noble, I got the king honoring me, I got all the other people honoring me, and if you're going to let a few naysayers bother you, that's a lack of maturity. That's a lack of good perspective. And so you see that struggle in Haman. And so he has to find a way, not only of, it says here in verse 6, not only of killing Mordecai, but he says, you know what, that's not enough for me. I want to kill all the Jews. And so he gets this idea. He concocts this. I want to take them all out. They are all a problem. So he gets this command that he wants to kill not only Mordecai, but instead, as it says in verse 6, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In Esther 3, verse 7, we go on and read that in the 12th year, so we started off with Vashti in the 3rd year. We've had them, he's been away at war, and Esther's been queen all this time, but now it's 9 years after that. In the first month, on the first month, the month of Nisan on their calendar, so in this case it's like for them, it is like November is, I believe, or October, November is the first year of the Jewish calendar. In this first month, they cast the pur, or the lot, they roll the dice, in the presence of Haman, and they selected a day, and they selected a month, and the lot fell to the 12th month, the month of Adar. And this is, because the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, things can float from month to month. Last year, here in 2020, it was in March. Next year, it's going to be February 25th or 26th, right in there. And that's when that happens. So it happens in the first month. There's 11 months from now is when we're going to have the annihilation of the Jews. And some time then to plan, some time to communicate. And time also to get the king in on his plot. So he's picked his day. Now he needs the king behind him to pull off something as audacious as this. And he does it in this really sly, telling half the truth sort of way. There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all of your provinces of the kingdom. And he's like, they're dispersed, but they're not really dispersed. Because you know what? They keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from all those other people, and they do not obey the king's law. Now, they're paying their taxes. They're doing their jobs. They're obeying the king's laws. What he's really saying, what he should be saying is, there's one dude, Haman, that just ticks me off, and I want to take him out. And not only him, but I'm so mad at him, I want to kill all the others too. He doesn't reveal his real purpose. He paints all the Jews in a caricature, and Haman makes them look bad. They keep themselves separate. They're not like the rest of us. And so Haman says, here's my idea, king. I got an idea for you. If it would please you, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give you 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasure. Hey, if you'll let me have this little revenge fantasy, I'll be sure to kick some money into your treasury, into your campaign. And you might be surprised to hear him say this in the next verse. He says he takes off his ring, he gives it to him, and notice they call him Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, again pointing out his connection to King Agag and his opposition to the Jewish people. And in verse 11, Xerxes says to our evil antagonist, keep the money. The king's in a good mood, right? And not only that, but the king's really rich. I read that when Alexander the Great conquered the Babylonian captivity, sorry, I should back up. There was a Greek Jewish historian, Herodotus, who noticed that King Xerxes received 12,000 talents of gold a year from all the various people that he had conquered but left them in place, like from, say, from Syria or from somebody. Okay, you can have a king, you can be there, but you got to pay, or, like your protection money. 12,000 talents of gold, which is roughly a ton of gold, a year. Not a bad haul. when Alexander the Great went and conquered, and he found this, it is reported that he found over 130,000 talents of gold. So like 13 years worth of this tribute all piled up there, sitting there doing nothing. He didn't even have to spend it on military or anything else. And if he's throwing the kind of banquets that he threw and fed people for 180 days, you know that this guy is doing real. You keep the money. And you do with the people as you please. Kind of remarkable that someone could be that callous, right? And to say, yeah, sure, annihilate him. Although he doesn't, did Haman ever say he wanted to annihilate them all? Did he ever say, I want to murder all of them? He just said, there's this people. They're separate. Let a decree be issued to destroy them. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean send them off to another place you don't see them anymore? Maybe it meant kill them. We aren't entirely sure about that, how much King Xerxes was thinking about this. But clearly, even if he is thinking about it, he's like, I'm the most powerful ruler in the world. If they cause trouble for somebody in my kingdom, I don't need them. I'll find more. I'll conquer more. Rather cavalier attitude towards a group of millions of people, and just accepting one person's word for them being destroyed. It kind of, again, just sort of a scary scenario. So our villain then makes this decree and has it spread out, and the king's rules and laws put on it with the signet thing that on the signature is pointing out that they were sent out, that on the 13th day, on the 13th day, they sent this out. It was all written and signed by the king. And the dispatches, verse 13, were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month. So 11 months from now, 11 months from this day exactly, I want people to gather around, kill every Jew, and then also plunder their goods. So they've given people a motivation to do this heinous thing. You're going to get their property. You're going to get their money. And sent out to every province, every nation, and every language. They go out, they read it. And it says, including goes out to this winter palace in Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink. So ideally, the king is back in his other palace. He doesn't even know. But in Susa, where Esther is and where the other palace, the winter palace, is at, the whole city is bewildered. Because they've come to know the Jews. They've come to respect them as good citizens, like Haman. Sorry, not Haman. Our good guy, Mordecai. Yeah, you didn't have to stomp on that because it was a mistake anyway. He's a good guy. He's been looking out for the king. So they're just really bewildered and surprised. And so that brings us to another question. Where did Mordecai and Esther turn when they're in this kind of time of trouble? What were they going to do? As Mordecai says to Esther later on, we'll look at it in a second, perhaps you're in this position of influence for such a time as this. There is another group of people in the Old Testament, men of good character who knew the scriptures and knew what needed to be done. Boy, isn't that a description of what we need in our nation, in our world today? People who love God and center their life around Him and know His Word and know His ways and then live that out. So we have this question, this idea of what did they turn? What did they do? Well, if you take a look at chapter 4, when Mordecai hears about this, he is, chapter 4, verse 1, tears his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, went out into the city. He's wailing loudly and bitterly. When you get the sense he's not the only Jew there in Susa who's doing this. He can't go into the palace. He can't see Esther because, points out in verse 2, no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter. And so as the Jews hear this, as they hear this proverb throughout all of the provinces, they are fasting and weeping and wailing, lying in sackcloth and ashes. It's interesting, the book of Esther never uses the word prayer, and it never uses the word or name of God. It's not in there. It's not in the entire thing. And yet, we know and we believe God was at work. I would suggest to you, when Mordecai is saying that perhaps it was you were put in this such a place as this for a time such as this, he leaves it unsaid, but we would believe it by faith. Perhaps God placed you in this place of influence for such a time as this. When they are fasting and praying, or fasting and mourning, they are praying. This is what the whole next passage, when, because he can't get in, they see this, but he gives a copy of the edict and gets it through, passing it back and forth through this sympathetic eunuch who's doing all this. And Mordecai, his words come back to Esther that, you're going to be annihilated. And at the end of verse 8, in Esther 4, verse 8, he he urged her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Mordecai makes a big request. Hey, you're there, you're his queen, go in and talk to the king and beg for mercy for us. But Esther reports back, and something for us to realize that maybe we wouldn't have known this kind of detail, but in verse 11, all the king's officials, the people of the royal provinces, everyone knows that if any man or woman approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned by the king, has but one law, that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the golden scepter to him and spare his life. I wonder, I want to say it came out in 2016, 2017, a Christian-produced version of the story of Esther called One Night with the King. Did any of you see that? It's really a very dramatic moment when she pushes those doors open and risks this. And what I appreciated about it is not only that she's pushing the doors open and risking going into the inner chamber, but think of the guards that would have been there that would instantly slay someone. And in that scene of that movie, they have two rows of scribes kneeling, and their whole thing is to write down whatever the king says or whatever he decides in those moments. They're writing it down for the annals of the king. They're writing it in the various different languages so it can quickly go out to all the other provinces when they need that. There were dozens of people in this room. All of them would have been shocked that Esther would have been this bold to step through and do what Mordecai is suggesting. And all of them would have known, you have one chance. If the king shows you favor and points that scepter at you, you're okay. If the king gives you a thumbs up or the final rose or whatever, you're all right. But otherwise, it's going to be like Ellen on her little game show. She pushes the button and down you fall into a pool of slop. At least that's what I see in the commercials. I don't know what's in the pool and I don't know what they're doing wrong, but I just know Ellen seems to enjoy pushing the button and making them fall. So it's a bad thing. And that's what she says back to Mordecai in verse 11, that everyone will be put to death. And then when Mordecai hears that, he sends back an answer. And all this is being done third person through messages, through scrolls. It's almost like texting today. They're not ever face to face when they do it. But he gives back this answer. Do not, I'm in verse 13, do not think that you are in the king's house and you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But he's writing, he says, you and your father's family. He said, I know I'm number one man on Haman's evil list. I know I'm the one he's gunning for. And if they get me, they're going to get you too. And he's really an expression of faith, isn't it? God's not going to let his people get absolutely annihilated and wipe out. He'll bring up deliverance some way, somehow. But have you ever heard the song, Let there be peace on earth. We sang this in junior high. I remember this. It was a big deal. And let it begin with thee, right? Isn't that how the song goes? Let it begin with me. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's the right way that song goes. Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. We have our part to play, right? Deliverance could come someplace else, but you know what? There is a part for you and I to play. We talked about it a bit in the sermon of what that part might be, whether it's time for us to be silent, time for us to speak, when, where, how, for whom, and so on. We talked about some of that. But Esther's being asked to do this, and she knows the risk she's taking. She hears that, and then she sends one more reply to him. And odds are it's not going to be safe enough for them to talk and share. So she asks, in verse 16, go and gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Not fast and pray, but fast for me. And we know the prayer is implied. And do not eat or drink. I and my maids will do the same. When it is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. In this case, she's willing to risk breaking the law for the fulfillment of the greater law of saving life. And that's something for us to reflect on as well when there is perhaps a greater law that we follow and when we stand up and when we help and so forth and so on. The pastor who came up with the idea of the story, not Max Lucado, he was the guy that's at Max Lucado's church and introduced it, and his name absolutely is Randy Frazee. There we go, Randy Frazee. He tells the story of being in junior high and seeing this kid getting picked on. Picked on because, and this is terrible, he had hydrocephalus. I don't know if you know what that is. It's water on the brain, essentially. So his skull is a bit larger than everyone else's, and he's a little more awkward than everyone else. He doesn't have as good a balance and everything. So these junior high boys are picking on him, calling him Watermelon Head. And Randy Frazee says, when I saw them bothering Greg, I wanted to go do something. And I was afraid of the other kids. I was scrawny. I was little. I thought they would, hurt me too, or even hurt me worse. So I didn't do it. And I've regretted it every day since. And I ask us all to think about the good we might do and the difference we might make if we, not in fear, but in faith, pursue doing what it is that God offers before us, where he places us, who we might be able to influence. I can't probably go to Iran and influence them to drop their nuclear weapons, or go to North Korea and stop them with their stuff, or go to Russia and stop getting Putin to poison people, whatever it is. We're probably not in a position to do that. But what's the good we can do where we are? Among our family, among our friends, in our communities, in our nations. For whom could we speak up that can't speak for themselves? And Esther alone is in this position. I suppose if all the Jews wanted to, they could have gotten picket signs and marched around. That's not fair. You can't do that to us. But all it would have done is brought more condemnation on themselves. Esther has this opportunity. So she's praying, and she's pretty darn strategic about it, right? She goes about this in chapter 5, tells us she goes, she enters the door, she takes the risk. And in chapter 5, verse 3, the king says, oh, you're so, Esther, I love you. What's your request? Even up to half of my kingdom. And her request, she doesn't come right out with it right then and there. Right? I would have thought, don't miss your opportunity, right? But Esther, perhaps because she is his queen, his wife, she knows his heart and thinks there's a right time and a right place to tell him this, and it's not in front of all of his other officials that it's going to embarrass him. But if I get him in a room by himself with Haman, boo. If I get him in a room with Haman and I tell him that guy is trying to kill me and all of his other people, I know the king's got a good heart and he won't let that happen. So she says, let's have a banquet, right? And it's so interesting that I would have thought, okay, perfect idea. They're working, they're eating, and they're drinking. The king even asked her, now what's your petition? It'll be given to you, even up to half of my kingdom. You think, all right, this is her moment, right? Do it, tell him. But verse 7 tells us, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come tomorrow to a banquet I will prepare for them, and then I'll answer the king's question. Thank you. Sorry. I missed it. Let's do this one more time, king. Let's have one more special meal. Let's have your special friend there. And I don't know exactly why that was necessary. Probably everything would have worked out just fine if she had told him. But it really adds to the sweetness of the revenge that happens. Because Haman is so excited and thrilled when he goes home. And when he sees Mordecai one more time, which gives him one more dose of rage. And you could just sort of picture him thinking, oh yeah, you little pipsqueak, I can't wait till what next month's going to bring to you. In fact, he goes home and he ought to just be so happy and excited. But his immaturity, his small-mindedness, oh, it's so great. I got good news and I got bad news. The good news is the king had me to this banquet and I'm the only one invited and I get to come again tomorrow and do all this. And but if it wasn't for that Jew Mordecai just spoiling everything for me. He's again seeing his one opponent as opposed to the thousands who support him. And his wife gives him this great idea. Hey, why don't you have a gallows there? Why don't you have a giant pole 75 feet high? So when you kill him, raise him high. I mean, do it in style, Haman. And he likes the idea. So there's this sort of setup. He's getting closer to his revenge. It's getting clear. There's the gallows. There's the pole of impalement that's there. All of it's in place. So it just sort of heightens to happen. But perhaps also, Esther was nudged by God to do this plan because of this one more detail. Chapter 6. The king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. And he found recorded there, so, I can't sleep, I'm bored. What's on HBO? Well, he didn't have HBO. All right, then read me all of my conquests, read me all the good things I did. Go ahead, come on, give me this. And in the midst of all that, king, on the 12th day of July, back 9 years ago, there was this plot against you. Remember those two bad guys, those dudes who were your doorkeepers? They were plotting to assassinate you. Well, that got stopped, and it got stopped by this guy, Mordecai. And, Mordecai did it, and so the king asked, well, did he ever get any honor? Did he ever get any recognition? Verse 3, nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. And the king, who can't sleep, suddenly gets up and says, who's in the throne? Well, lo and behold, maybe he's trying to, get an early edge on the party, whatever it is. But even in the middle of the night, this slimy guy is there hanging around the kingdom again. After he probably got his gallows built, and he's just so excited he can't sleep. So he goes back to the palace, and Haman just happens to be hanging around, and the king's all enthusiastic about this. And I love verse 6, Haman comes in. What should be done? Oh, yes, of course. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? And the second half of verse 6 points out, Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would want to honor more than me? There's so much self-centeredness and immaturity in this guy. So he thinks, well, he must be talking about me, right? So who's he? He's already honored me so much. What could I get him to do? I know. And that's verse 7, right? For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and ride a horse the king has ridden. And with the royal crest placed on the horse's head, let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse throughout the city, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. And the king's like, That's brilliant. I love it, right? You see that in verse 10. Go at once. Get the robe and the horse and do just what you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew. Not for you. Haman, I want you to be the one to do it. So the one that Haman hates gets honored. You know, God in his wonderful way is a reverser. Right? He reverses the curse of sin. We know that. He brings Jesus to reverse that. But he is also the one that says, the high and mighty will be brought low, and whoever humbles themselves will be exalted. He is in the reversal business. And we see that alive in the story. It's sweet irony. This has just got God's fingertips all over it. And Haman has to go all throughout the streets. Can you just imagine him? What his enthusiasm level must have been, as he's doing this. This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. You can just sort of picture it. His words are probably getting drowned out by everybody cheering for this local hero. But he has to say the words because the king has done it. And when he's over, Mordecai just goes back to the gate. He's normal. He's gonna be consistent and be himself. But verse 12 tells us, chapter 6, verse 12, Haman, rushed home with his head covered in grief, and he told Zerah, his wife, and all of his friends everything that had happened. And they see the handwriting on the wall. Their advisors and his wife say to him, since this Mordecai before you, whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. So God's against you now. You're in deep weeds, buddy. And while they're still talking, while they say this, it's time for the banquet. And that's where it's all going to go south for him, right? He gets there, and of course, Esther is going to make this dramatic moment when she says, what is it that you want? I'll give you even up to half of my kingdom. And she says this, grant me, O king, my life. She makes it very dramatic. That is my petition. And spare my people. That is my request. For I, my people, have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we had just been sold off into slaves, I would have kept quiet because there's no such thing would have justified distressing the king. But we're being sold to be slaughtered, annihilated. And the king doesn't remember this, right? He just, he's a good guy. Hey, I'll give Haman what he wants. Boo, right? And the king asks, who is it? Who is the one who would dare to do this? Notice the king assumes that there is a person who is behind this, not just some outside invader. Like, who? Somebody's got to be in charge of this. Who is it? And Esther had it arranged that it was just them. The enemy and the adversary is this vile Haman. Boo! It describes that the villain is terrified. Verse 7 says, the king gets up in a rage and leaves the wine, and he goes into the palace garden. And Haman, realizing, that the king has already decided his fate, stays behind to beg Queen Esther for his own life. And he's so eager in doing this that he's falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. So she's laying on these nice cushions. He's coming up close to her. He stumbles and falls right as the king's coming back in the room. And so it goes from just being, you're trying to, kill my queen and her people. Now you're trying to molest her too. So he absolutely loses it. And they gag him, they bind him, and off he goes. And the eunuch happens to mention, oh, hey, king, conveniently, this is in verse 8, right? Verse 8's a long verse. Conveniently, King, a gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He made it for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. Make sure we make the connection for you, King, just in case you miss it in your passion right now. And then into verse 9, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury was subsided. Now, you'd think that'd be the end of the story, right? Oh, she's spared. The king did it. There's just this one thing. We've heard this before in the Old Testament, that whenever one of the laws of the Medes and the Persians, the Babylonians, whenever the king makes a law, it cannot be undone. So the next two chapters are telling the story how a new commandment gets put in place, that the Jews are empowered to defend themselves. And it is a tradition yet to this day that, and we have it in our own stand your ground law, right? If your life is threatened by someone, you have the right to use deadly force to protect yourself. And so they are empowered with that. And instead of all the Jews dying, it points out in verse 9 that 75,000 of these enemies are killed who were about to try to kill the Jews. So, and then they begin to celebrate Purim this day, remembering this freedom and joy that they had of doing that. So that's our story in Queen Esther. Great stuff here of her faith, her the guidance God gave her as she prayed and fasted of how to go about doing this, and how God was not going to let his people be destroyed. He had this bigger plan of bringing Jesus into the world. We get one more chapter in the Old Testament. We're going to read a bit from Malachi and a bit from Nehemiah, I had to get that right, about rebuilding of the walls. So from the leader of that time, and then also from the prophet of that time. And we'll leave that at that, but let's close right now with prayer. Oh, gracious Lord, on this holiday weekend, we thank you for the things we are going to celebrate for those who work, and that is part of Labor Day. We think of frontline workers like grocery store workers and medicine and doctors and everyone else. We think of those in government and military and police who are all risking their lives for us, and we ask your protection over them. As we enjoy an extra day of rest this weekend, we pray for your protection and blessing over us. And yet we also pray, as we sang earlier, grant us wisdom and grant us courage for the facing of this hour, of this day, of our situation, and how and when and where we might be of an influence, right where you've planted us, just as you helped Esther and Mordecai to do. Be glorified as you work that in us, Lord, and watch over your people. Fill them with peace and strength, wisdom and joy. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all very, very much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. No more Haman. Boo!